First of all, thank you all. Thank you all for being here. I know it's you all have a busy schedule, and then hope we want to make this very productive and very useful for you all. Before we start, I want to really acknowledge our partners at OpenAI. Adina, thank you for being here, as well as the entire OpenAI team to kind of help us shape this conversation for today. The conversation today is, we built it for this evening, is around financial services industry for a reason. It is not that the leaders of the room are asking whether AI works. It's more in the financial services industries where it's really regulated, really, I would call it a brownfield environment. How do you really take those AI solutions, applied AI solutions or pilots which are running, really productionalize it and sustain it and run it with discipline around engineering and finance, right? You got to ensure that that's happening. And that's the biggest lingering question in the room of how do you do that? And a lot of blockers, like Gurinder said, we had a conversation at the VEX event as well, is really taking pilots to scale, especially in the financial sector where it's completely regulated. So, and it's a very high-stake environment. We cannot, I've been in the industry prior to this job at Visa and PayPal. I know where a 1 second downtime is a no-no, big no-no, and one security breach is a reputational risk for it. So how do you do that in that type of a high-stake environment? How do you bring AI into production? So that's amazing. So for that conversation, I'm really happy and excited to have Niraj here. Niraj actually joined us a couple of weeks back, and I'm so totally excited because he comes multifaceted, because his industry experience of financial services, retail, and tech, which is rare in this industry. So I'm happy to have you, Niraj, and I would love to get your perspective on some of the things which is going on here. So first of all, I would just jump into, as you're stepping into the...
Before you ask me,
yeah.
Folks, really nice to meet you. I'm super excited to be on board here. And always, in this AI era world, you're always learning. So, and I'm also, just as you're learning, I'm also learning from your experiences. I'll share 3 most relevant contexts of my past experiences, why I felt like being a part of Altimetrik is super critical. Before this, I was a senior executive at Wayfair, where I led their AI, data, and cloud transformation to GCP Cloud and Gemini Enterprise. Went through a lot of learning. And before Wayfair, I was a VP at Google, where I actually built the Gemini Enterprise platform. I was a part of that team. So it was all the feedback loop of all the bugs I put into the product that I had to go fix at Wayfair. And before Google, I actually was an executive at American Express, and I have a lot of empathy for financial services. I was working for Mark Gordon, driving their cloud and data hybrid cloud modernization. And it was a great learning in terms of how much rigor governance goes into financial industry in terms of just implementing some of the transformation journeys. Doesn't matter what part of the stack it is. So looking forward to sharing my experiences on both sides of the ecosystem, as well as learning from you today.
Super excited. I also said this is amazing in-depth experience in multiple industry. And that's what Altimetrik plays in. Financial services is our biggest industry we play in, and then retail and life sciences. And that experience will bring us a lot more value. So Niraj, as you stepped in as the Chief Data and AI Officer for Altimetrik, most companies are still debating whether they have an AI strategy or a data strategy. What's the first thing you're changing in how Altimetrik is thinking about it?
Yeah, it's less about changing. It's more about reinforcing the culture of data and AI are inseparable. Like you used to think about data in silo, and that was just data warehouse, right? And if you think about AI in silo, you're just thinking about hallucination. So data is super critical for AI, because AI models can only get better with the enterprise context and the ontology and the semantic graphs you think about, right? And vice versa, you think about how critical AI is, where you need to think about in the enterprise, the governance, the insights that it brings in for the data. And AI is the best way for data today at scale in the enterprise to become a lot more actionable. You have enough siloed insights, but it's very hard to make that actionable in an automated fashion across your enterprise workflows. So having them together is super critical, first thing. The second thing that I want to reinforce is as you think about the enterprise AI journey, the market is moving so rapidly, and I'd love to get your feedback on this one. It's moving so rapidly from implementing AI as like copilots or assistants to AI becoming agentic operating layer, right? The AI operating layer has become super critical for the success of how deeply you want to embed intelligence into your workflows. Now, AI operating layer, actually, you can think about this in few dimensions. Like, it's a very critical to think about this in like five layers. The most important layer at the top is a semantic context layer. It's your data, right? The second thing that comes is the orchestration layer. You really need to think about the enterprise architecture of this AI operating layer in terms of what's your architecture for the enterprise context layer? What is your architecture for the orchestration layer? This orchestration layer is where you start to put together, you chain your agents together, right? You move from being a co-pilot siloed agents to a agentic workflow. You need to think about, how do I build a model agnostic architecture? How do I think about implementing some of the flows that needs to be super deterministic? So you need to go through rules engine versus an LLM flow versus a RAG flow. So depending on the intent of your action, you need to think about how do you orchestrate across 3 different routes in a multi-agentic architecture, right? Then the next layer from the orchestration layer becomes your evaluation layer. With the velocity of how quickly the models are getting developed and released, it's impossible for the enterprise, at the scale of enterprise, to adopt and absorb every 2 weeks and swap out models. So you really need to think about your evaluation layer in terms of how you're going to train this model, test this model in your production environment, right? The next layer from there is your governance layer. Super critical. This is where you think about audit. This is where you think about identity, access management. You think about permissions. And you have to think about, the enterprise are really good at that, right? You have really thought through it, especially financial services. You are really good at it in terms of putting the governance together, right? With the risk management, audit trail, SOX compliance, all that stuff, right? And then the final thing, which a lot of enterprise scale really needs, and they don't think about it, is the change management. Because AI is not just about tech. You really need to think about how you're going to step back and think about the cultural shift, the humans in the loop shift, right? Because as you think about these 5 layers, all the way from enterprise context layer to orchestration layer to evaluation layer, and then your governance layer and change management, they all interplay with each other. And that's your AI operating layer at the enterprise scale. And a lot of the enterprises are struggling to actually embed this operating layer into their existing workflow. And this is where they need help. You're going all the way from agents to a operating layer implemented into your operating systems, into your decision systems, into your workflows. And that's the journey that the market is going into.
Oh, makes sense. I mean, very, very similar to, we rewind 3 decades, 7-layer OSI network layer, right? That's how we are taught through. And you're very much clear on the layered approach of architecture we need to think through. But what do you think in the financial industry is the real gap between AI ambition and AI in production at scale?
Yeah, very good question. And I was talking to a few of my colleagues from American Express, just a few weeks ago in terms of how they're thinking about implementing. And this is less about ambition. Like, everybody has a lot of ambitions to actually go push the envelope. It's more about really understanding what does it take for a successful AI model that was implemented as a pilot and experimentation into a production environment. And you really have to step back and think about your enterprise architecture plan first. And put those 5 layers in front of you and say, this is my target state. I need to think about my enterprise context layer, which connects the right data systems together. I need to think about my orchestration layer. When do I need to put humans in the loop for approval? And when do I need to automate approval? How do I think about the evaluation layer? How do I test the new releases of the model? Do I really need them? And how rapidly can I swap those models out and test the entire environment, right? And then the fourth one is your governance. This is, again, auditability. You want to make sure that if it's automated, you have the audit trail, you have understanding the security, permissions, and accessibility of those models. And finally, it comes to change management, right? So going from running agents as co-pilots and assistant to an agentic operating layer into your system, that's the journey, that's the ambition that financial services wants to go to, right? And that's where they need the help.
Very, very well said. Especially in the regulated environment, you want something which is enforceable, right? You can't just have a chart and a layer and say this is how it's going to operate. Something has to enforce, and this layered approach would enforce. To your point, auditability is number one in any regulated industry. You know, an AI decision needs to be auditable, traceable. The second point is repeatable. These decisions need to be repeatable. The same business parameter should repeat the same decision which comes out, and I think that you're enforcing through these layers. And the last but not least is just, it's reversible. You should be able to reverse the decision AI does, and that is very important. I think that's what you very well covered in the five-layered approach of enforcing it. It's not just an architecture you just appreciate on. Thanks for the Niraj. But also we did a research earlier this year jointly with HFS and HFS Research, and we call that as humans at the helm. And how many of you know how many humans are in the loop? We changed that a little bit around to humans at the helm of AI. We surveyed around 500 out of the global 2,000 executives. The headline number there was striking. 80 to 95% of enterprises reported limited return on AI investments. Only 13% have reached very high maturity, right? So Niraj, when you look at the gap as our Chief Digital and AI Officer, what does it tell you about where enterprises are getting stuck?
And this is also, a lot of learning in this room, so you guys should probably just echo back here. My opinion is there is a lot of impetus given to building impressive models in experimentation and thinking that is the production state. And I feel like the journey from implementing siloed standalone models as co-pilots is very different from running a production-grade agentic workflow that actually implements across these 5 layers of operating layer, AI operating layer, in terms of deeply embedding intelligence into your workflow, into your operating systems, into your data systems. And that transformation journey takes a lot of effort. And I have a lot of empathy for financial services because they go through a lot of rigor compliance. For them, running a model in experimentation and moving into a production at scale with reliability, repeatability, and auditability is a transformation journey. And you cannot skip these layers, right? You cannot build a semantic context layer without having an orchestration layer architecture, because you have to make sure that deterministic flow doesn't hallucinate from an LLM flow. If somebody wants to query in an online banking system, I just want to go to my checking account, I want to see if my order has cashed in. That is not hallucination. That is a very deterministic flow, a query to your order, your banking system to actually go query on that customer account, right? Versus asking a question on cross-selling and upselling different offers, CD rates, like, yes, right? A lot of RAG information can be implemented in a vector database, so you can go do that. And when you build an orchestration layer, you cannot do that without having an understanding of your governance layer. What is the auditability, permissibility? Does the model have an access to this? Am I having the right implementation of compliance implementation here, right? And then you have the evaluation framework that you have to test it out. So a lot of these complications come into play when you think about running from experimentation to production. And I feel that is the journey that is a lot more challenging than a lot of folks actually think about.
That's great. No, absolutely. Just, there are a few other questions kind of relating. I think you touched very, very clearly on those layers and how the hype of pilots to production is important, especially in the regulated industry. But what's one thing in the industry is overhyping right now, and one thing that is underestimating?
I think what's overhyped is the velocity at which the models are being produced and released. A lot of understanding is that enterprise is actually using it, and it's not, right? So I think it's been overhyped that just because there is a release of a new model, enterprises put it in production. And there is a lot of underestimation of the effort required to implement these 5 layers of operating layer deep into your systems. There is a lot of underestimation of the effort that goes into implementing a forward deployment model in your environment when somebody actually has the understanding of implementing this into your pre-prod environment and thinking about taking it into production. So if you step back a little bit and said, okay, I'm going to have these 4 agents go push it in production, I bet you'll end up with like those 5 layers questions being asked to yourself. Okay, have I done this? Have I done this? Is it a checklist? Is it a one-page document that actually goes and creates a checklist into a pre-production environment, right? So I feel there is a lot of underestimation of effort required to take these agents, these models into production. And I don't expect enterprise, especially financial services, to adopt each and every release, and you shouldn't. Because you have to figure out what's the right level of swappability of these models. When do you actually need to change the model? What are you trying to solve? What's outcome-driven approach here? Which workflows need which model? For what reason? Right? So there's a lot of that understanding that goes into the enterprise architecture layer.
It's great. I think one differentiator for us as a company, Altimetrik, is our engineering rigor, which we hold it close to our chest and want to make sure that it happens, consistently every time when we do, and our engineers hold it very close as well. And as we think about, and as you talk through, Niraj, about this 5-layer and operating system, and it is that engineering rigor which is getting a lot more overemphasized.
Yep.
In this AI environment, I think it's even more amplified that we do not lower the bar on the engineering discipline. And you and I in the room, as we have read several things in the last 90 days or so, where big marketplaces going down because relying completely and not having that whole rigor in place, and having, when agents are coding and you have a human in the loop, and agents are coding at a machine speed, and you're throwing a human in the loop to review. At some point, it becomes rubber stamping, then reviews. So how do you catch up, and how do you make human at the helm, and how do you bring back that engineering rigor is what is very important. Thanks for that. That approach of thinking through that as an AI OS in an enterprise is absolutely the way we should think about it.
In fact, I remember meeting you about a few weeks ago at one of the conference forums that you were at, where you were invited to present to a forum of 200 CEOs and executives at the Constellation Forum. I'd love to get your insights on what you heard, what resonated there.
I think I was literally reflecting on my experience when I was I'm continuing to be part of financial services industry, but when I was specifically at Visa or PayPal, bringing any change into the environment, we had a set of rigor you need to follow through. And that rigor is not gone today. You got to continue following, but yes, you got help with your AI agents to bring in that productivity. But do not assume that AI is going to do all of those checks and balances to get something out in production. Especially in environments where in the financial industry, it's complex. You have systems for a reason which is isolated and it's a workhorse and it's a cash cow, and you do not want to go changing something and bringing it to the knees and having a reputational issue. So you are very much more pushing your engineering rigor to ensure that nothing goes wrong. And I think that really connected, especially as I was saying, not just the systems and your data is also fragmented. How do you do this change in a way that you don't impact your existing business? You do it very incrementally. Now you add on your AI, applied AI, and you want to do that in isolation. It works fantastic, and you bring it into production, breaks everything apart. So that's the discipline I talk about here, and the way you laid it out. Of every enterprise has to think that as an AI OS is important, and we laid that out in that Constellation research, and it connected with a lot of the executives there saying, yes, absolutely. And the example I was just stating, where code generated, PR created, AI reviewed it, code in production, the next thing you know is the marketplace is down, and all of the engineers got summoned, and the one thing CTOs pushed there, and I'm sure this is all public information you guys should have read, is to share what went wrong. We got to bring back our rigor of what we had. Is very important, and use AI as much to enforce the rigor. And hence, I think I like the way you put that as we need to have an AI OS which enforces that rather than just checkboxing and say we followed through something. So, so I think that really stuck to the crowd when we talked in the Constellation research, Niraj. I think I know we are running out of time, and Gurvinder is asking me to cut it off. But one thing, if everyone in this room has to take one thing back, what would it be? I know it's a tough one, but one stuff.
I'll give you, this is me, giving my thoughts on my past experiences and what I went through. Don't be complacent with micro-productive steps by implementing AI in spots of, in small isolated spots of your workflow, and think that that's the target state. Your target state should be how deeply integrated is your intelligence into your workflows. Have you pushed the envelope enough in terms of going through the rigor of this operating layer implemented into your workflows deep enough that you have finally reached the target state of areas where you could have automated, you've done it, and areas you could have had humans in the loop making the approval of the workflow, you have it implemented. So to me, that would be one thing that I've learned from my past, where we would actually have such impressive models implemented just to be micro-productive. But when we actually step back and say, if I can redesign this workflow today, I would have done it very differently.
No, that's great. Thanks, Niraj. But I think one other thing, to just add on to that, the whole here is to, coding is a task. Coding agents doesn't replace a software engineer. Software engineering is a lot more than coding. I think coding is now becoming one of the things which is highly productive using a coding agent, especially in the brownfield environment where somebody has to think through the entire systems and the architecture and what gets impacted where, and utilize where needed the agents to increase your productivity, but the engineering and the architecture rigor needs to continue on, especially in a regulated industry like ourselves here in financial services. So having said that, thank you all again, and hope you'll all have a great time here. Gurvinder?
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you, folks.
If I can, maybe one question, if anybody has a question for Raj and Niraj before I call on the next set of speakers. We have time for one question.
Either I was really clear or very boring, or both.
Question for Niraj. He's more qualified than me.
Yeah, there's a question there.
So I have one.
Can you share your name and where you're from?
Sure. Yeah. Sania Mushir. I'm a VP at TD Bank, and I run our finance controls team. So I have a governance team, governance, risk, and compliance, and a SOX governance and oversight team. My question is around, you made a comment that AI is nothing without data. And when you look at these GSIB banks, right, data privacy and security is such a monumental thing, right? So when you're talking to other banks, these large banks, how are they addressing data and AI? Even within my org, within finance, it's not easy to, I'll say, outsource the data to my technology teams, right? And so if I want to build workflows in my org, that, I guess, sharing of data has its own limitations. So are you seeing that at other banks, and how are they overcoming that challenge?
We definitely, at least I'll share my perspective, and then Raj will probably have a lot more color to this. So I'm definitely seeing this, and that's why the definition of builder is changing, right? When you actually now, as like you said, in your role, you can fundamentally go create some agentic flows to get some insights and to interconnect, chain some of these agents across different systems to give you some actionable insights. You could argue that, hey, do I really need to go outside my firewall or across the department to get this data, or can I do it within my four walls, right? So we are seeing a lot more organic implementation of agentic flow being implemented within the financial flows, as opposed to reaching out to the tech teams to get some of the analytics done or analysis done, right? So that's what the trend I'm seeing a lot more. And of course, you have to go through the compliance requirements of the data and all the stubbing out in PII information. But there is a lot more accessibility of how you can now create some of these actionable insights by interconnecting your systems. And that's where the ontology graph, the semantic graph becomes very important, because not every data is required. You just need to know what the right systems are to interconnect, that gives you enough actionable insights.
Got it. Thank you.
Also, I would just quickly add on, Niraj, there's another trend, we kind of cited this probably 9 months back around, small language models and domain language models, which is specific to an industry and a function, for example, to your finance function of a bank. So how do you distill down through reinforcement learning, open-weighted models to a smaller language model, and have that hosted within your private cloud so that your data doesn't leave? That's another way, rather. I showed you one way. So we have cited that, and we started something called a domainforge.ai, where we forge domain level small language models, which would be very specific to your use case. And we could even distill it down to your functional area, which is finance. And that's a very good use case, not only in the financial services, in the insurance areas and everywhere. They just want their data can't leave, not just the company, but even the department. So we kind of have that. That trend will continue to go on, and open-weighted models are, every frontier model is, making that available today.